Hi, I'm Zach, and this is Challenger Vedic Astrology and Tarot. Welcome to the channel. So, today we're talking about why was Malcolm X in a cult? And if you like my videos, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out me and the channel. And if you'd like a Vedic Sidereal birth chart, a personal tarot reading, or an astrology consultation, the links to those will be in the description box and the comments below. Okay. So, for those that don't know, Malcolm X is one of my, all-time favorite historical people. Malcolm X, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. It's like a three-way tie. I just can't decide. But Malcolm X wasn't always a good person. He went through a big change in his life. And we'll be looking at that in his chart. He went to prison. He was racist. He was a criminal. I mean, there's a lot to unpack with Malcolm X. But in the end, he became a better man. But yeah, he did have significant karma with a cult, the Nation of Islam. So we're going to talk about all this as we dive into his chart. So let's dig in. Okay, so here we have the birth chart and the D9 navamsa chart of Malcolm X. Alright. So, first thing we see, he's a Sagittarius ascendant with Moon in Aries. In the navamsa, he's a Cancer ascendant with Moon in Gemini. These are always the most important things to look at, just right off the bat. Now, let's talk a bit about his life real quick. So, we know Malcolm X was a big part of the Nation of Islam. He was basically the face of it for a very long time. Nation of Islam was a cult. Very radical ideology. But let's talk about his early life a bit. So, Malcolm X's father was killed by the Ku Klux Klan, another cult. His father had 2 of his houses burned down. So, we're going to see what shows those themes, not what would necessarily cause it. Now, Malcolm X's 9th lord, 9th house's father, it's ruled by the sun. Sun's the significator of father, is in the 6th house. 6th house is the house of enemies. We see his father would have a lot of enemies. He was pushed in front of a trolley car by the Ku Klux Klan. But we also see Sun is in the nakshatra of Kritika. This is a nakshatra of burning. It's the nakshatra of fire. And it's with Venus and Rohini. Rohini is the nakshatra of vehicles. So his father had enemies that burned his house down and that pushed him in front of a car. So that is one thing that we see here. Now next, his mother was institutionalized for paranoia. And he went to prison himself for 6.5 years for breaking and entering. Him and a friend of his were with 2 white women who were their girlfriends. And the police encouraged the white women to claim that Malcolm and his friend had basically forced them into going along with the breaking and entering. and even tried to get them to claim that Malcolm X and his friend had raped them. So, these two white women did say that Malcolm X and his friend had forced them to be a part of the breaking and entering, but they refused to claim that they raped them. But Malcolm X did go to prison for 6.5 years for this. And, he was also a pimp in his early life. So, was he a criminal? Yes. Did he deserve to go to prison for 6.5 years? Maybe not. So, how do we see that he would have gone to prison? We'll talk about his mother's institutionalization later. So, his Jupiter, his ascendant lord, is retrograde. So, a retrograde Jupiter. Retrograde planets behave like they're in the previous house, especially later in life. But in his case, we see it playing out. His Jupiter retrograde acting like it's in the 12th house. 12th house is prisons. His ascendant lord in the 12th house of prisons. Now, for most people, 12th house would be like going to foreign lands or something. But for him, it was going to prison. In his D9 navamsa, his ascendant lord is in the 12th house of prisons. It's in an exchange yoga with Mercury, the 12th lord. One thing you will see is when the 1st and 12th lord are in combination together, or when they're in each other's houses like this, creating that exchange yoga, acting like they're conjunct, or when the 1st lord goes into the 12th house, a person can go to prison. But 12th house is also asylums. It's anywhere you feel isolated. Moon is the mother. His mother was institutionalized. In the birth chart, his 4th lord is Jupiter. 4th lord's the mother. His Jupiter's retrograde, acting like it's in the 12th house of asylums. Once again, we see his mother was institutionalized. So, next up, let's talk about the cult. Let's talk about the Nation of Islam. So, Malcolm X was a part of the Nation of Islam for a long time. He first started communicating with Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam, when he was in prison. I believe it was his siblings that had talked to him about it, and through letters. And then he started writing to Elijah Muhammad, and they started corresponding. But how do we see this cult karma? Like, what house represents cults? Can't think of one. 9th and 12th house. 9th house is religion. 12th house is spirituality. Maybe. But what really shows it is a certain nakshatra. In his navamsa chart, we see Sun and Saturn in the nakshatra of Purva Bhadrapada. This is the nakshatra of cults. Very strongly tied to cults. Now, Saturn is a person's karma. So we see he would have had a karma with cults. But what else do we see with this? Well, before I get into some of the other things with the cult, let's talk about Malcolm X as a person. His ascendant nakshatra is Mula. Mula is highly destructive. In his early life, he was destructive. His ascendant lord Jupiter is in Uttarashada, the nakshatra of hard-fought battles, of having a victory later in life. So we see his real success wouldn't come until late in life, which was true for him. It didn't come until, his mid-30s, basically. But also, heaviest of karma, Saturn in Swati. His exalted second and third lord. Second house is speech. Third house is communication. Exalted in the nakshatra of freedom. In the house of the masses. Society at large. In the sign of the masses, Libra. So this man was very eloquent in speaking for people to be free. Now, early in his, political career, it was on behalf of only black people. But later, that would change, as, I'll show later on. Now, his Mercury, you'd think it's not too strong. But it's in an exchange yoga with Mars. Between the 5th house of politics and the 7th house of the masses. Moon, Mercury, and Mars all acting conjunct. He would have very fiery, passionate communication. He'd be impatient when it came to politics. Also, Ashwini's tied to jokes. He could be very funny. Moon and Mercury and Ashwini, that will make someone funny. Mars is in Ardra. His fighting would make people angry. He would be able to rally the anger of the masses. It's with Pluto. Pluto is the nakshatra of sudden transformation. He would transform society through his anger. He would get the masses involved in politics because of that 5th and 7th house combination. But what we also see, let's talk about his navamsa for a second. So navamsa is a person's later life. I've mentioned this numerous times. You can never disregard the navamsa. From your early 30s onwards, navamsa is active. So we see he's an Ashlesha ascendant in Cancer. Ashlesha is a nakshatra tied to manipulation. So, one could argue he manipulated the masses. But, Ashlesha can also show being manipulated yourself. So, we see he could have been manipulated. Now, what do we also see? His Jupiter's in Purvashada. Jupiter is the biggest theme in your life. Purvashada is a nakshatra tied to strategizing. He would be a very good strategist. He would be a good writer as well. Purvashada and Uttarashada are tied to writing. Remember, his Mercury is strong in the birth chart. In the navamsa, it's also an exchange yoga, acting like it's in its own sign of Gemini. Now let's talk about the cult. So, Elijah Muhammad was the leader of this cult. Malcolm X started talking to him when he was in prison. He was like a pseudo-father figure to him. Because Malcolm X's father died early in his life. Remember, killed by the Ku Klux Klan. So, his pseudo-father figure was tied to a cult. How do we see that? The 9th house has a planet in Purva Bhadrapada. 9th house is also religion. It was a religious cult. His heaviest of karma tied to a cult. Now, Elijah Muhammad Malcolm ended up finding out from his son after seeing some things that looked suspicious when he would go to drop off donations for the Nation of Islam to Elijah Muhammad. His son told him when Malcolm asked about the young women that he had seen with children there. So Elijah Muhammad had sexually assaulted 6 different women, teenage girls that had been his secretaries, had 8 children with these teenage girls. Elijah Muhammad was a pedophile. He later admitted to this after, claiming it was a lie for a very long time. Malcolm X eventually turned Elijah Muhammad in for this. And in return, Elijah Muhammad had him assassinated. Now, that was never proven, but safe to say, it was likely the case. Heaviest of karma, Saturn and Purva Bhadrapada. Nakshatra of cults. Now, let's look at his 9th lord. 9th lord's a teacher, mentor, father figure, guru. So, his 9th lord goes into the 6th house of enemies in the birth chart. In the nakshatra of Kritika, with Venus and Rohini. And 9th house is Leo. His mentor would be regal, would be in a high up position. In the 6th house, so we see his mentor, his guru, could be his enemy. It's in Kritika. So, criticizing his guru made his guru his enemy. Now, Kritika is very much tied to affairs. Now, Kritika by itself doesn't necessarily show that it would for sure happen, but it's with Venus and Rohini. Rohini is strongly tied to affairs. So we see his guru would have had affairs. His mentor, teacher, Elijah Muhammad, had those affairs. Now, in the D9 navamsa chart, his 9th lord, Jupiter, rules Pisces, goes into the 6th house in Purva Ashada. Remember, the nakshatra of strategy. So, Elijah Muhammad made a plan to have Malcolm X killed. So, we can clearly see this in the chart. Now let's talk some more about Malcolm X here. Malcolm X has Rahu and Pushya in the 8th house. His desire would be to work towards transformation. He wanted to transform society. But we also see his BP, his destiny point, was tied to Jeshta. Jeshta is a nakshatra of overtaking the elder sibling, the eldest, becoming the king of the gods. His Rahu's in Jeshta in the Navamsa chart. So his desire was to overtake someone in politics. But also, Jeshta is a nakshatra of being overprotective. Protective to the point of being controlling. It's in the 5th house of children. Now, Zach, you might be thinking to yourself, Jeshta is tied to, rape and things like this. Sexual assault. Yes, it is. But it's not aspected by any malefics. This Jeshta is unafflicted. So, his moon is also unafflicted in the navamsa. In the birth chart, it's only aspected by Saturn. So for the most part, we see he'd be clear thinking. So he wouldn't lean into the malefic side of Jeshta. Instead, he was protective of children. But he also wanted to overtake people when it came to politics. So he started to become more famous than Elijah Muhammad. He was the face of the Nation of Islam. So, eventually he turned Elijah Muhammad in for the sake of protecting children, but also to rise to a higher position in politics. He left the Nation of Islam. Now, how do we see that? How do we see that change of beliefs? Going from, being a part of this cult to leaving it. Going from being racist to not being racist. How do we see this? Very simple. When you see the 9th and 8th houses connected. 9th house is a person's beliefs. 8th house is transformation. It shows a person's beliefs will transform. Their religious views could transform even. So, his 9th lord goes into the 8th house in the navamsa, or 6th house in the navamsa. So that wouldn't show it. But his 8th lord, Saturn, is in the 9th house of the navamsa. Later in life, his views, his beliefs would transform. And when did that happen? That happened when he took a pilgrimage to Mecca. And when he went there, he saw people of all races. People of all races, worshiping together. All dressed the same. As, a sign of camaraderie. Practicing their faith together. Malcolm X realized that he had been wrong. And note, his ascendant lord, the moon, is in the 12th house of foreign lands and spirituality. His ascendant lord, Jupiter, goes into the 12th house of foreign lands and spirituality. So we see he would eventually go to foreign lands in both cases. He became, more spiritual even. He overcame that manipulation. His beliefs changed. So we clearly see that Malcolm X wasn't a cult. But we also saw that this man, despite his flaws early in life, changed who he was. He became a better person and was trying to make the world a better place. And to end off this video, I want to say a quote from him. So, Malcolm X was quoting from Hamlet. "To be or not to be, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous misfortune, or fortune, I should say, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them." And then he continued, "And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living in a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it. And now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built. And the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone. Don't care what color you are. As long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. That was the man Malcolm X was. Towards the end of his life. Before he was assassinated. Malcolm X was, like I said, a flawed man early in life. But he did change. He became a better person. As that quote shows. Malcolm X believed in nonviolent protest. But he also believed in defending yourself. I'll be honest, I agree more with Malcolm X than I do with Martin Luther King Jr. For to use him as an example. And he'll be the person we talk about next. If you like my videos, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps out me and the channel. If you'd like a Vedic Sidereal birth chart, a personal tarot reading, or an astrology consultation, the links to those will be in the description box and the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.